All right, let's get started. It's 6:02. Welcome everyone. Good evening. It's the housing element info session for Reliez Valley. We've had this run of weekly housing info sessions to continue providing information to the public about the housing element and our statutory requirements to comply with updating the housing element and addressing several items we'll get into. It's important to remember that we're still in the inform stage, and we plan on tackling the housing element in the general plan by informing, then engaging, and then deciding. So it's important that we all have a common understanding of our opportunities and constraints in working with the housing element before we make decisions. So that's what these meetings have aimed to achieve. And also, it's a great opportunity for the public to ask questions and for us to provide as best answers as we can. So we'll do some short introductions and we'll have a short presentation, and then we'll go into the bulk of the meeting, which is the Q&A. So how about we do some introductions? We'll go staff first and then our GPAC representatives after. I'm Jonathan. I'm an assistant planner with the city. I've been working with the city just over 2 years now.
And I'm Sarah Allen, and I'm a senior planner with the city. I've been working here for 13 years.
My name is Diana Elrod. I am the housing consultant for the city, and I've been working for the city for about 16 years.
I'll go next.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Jim Cervantes. I'm the Reliez Valley representative and the vice chair of the GPAC. Maybe by way of background, our family has lived in La Miranda for the past 25 years and moved to Lafayette from Miranda about a decade ago. I think we came to Lafayette in part because we found our family coming more and more to the reservoir, downtown Lafayette for the restaurants. We became parishioners at St. Perpetua, even though we lived in Miranda. And so when we were looking for a new home about 10 years ago, we fell in love with Spring Hill Valley, with Briones and the open space around us, and just thought this was the place we wanted to be. And so we're delighted to be now full-time residents of Lafayette. I finished my 34-year career in investment banking in public finance last fall, and soon after that joined GPAC. And so I've been involved with this process since we started back in November. In addition to GPAC, I also have volunteered for the St. Perpetua Finance Committee and am the newest member of Lafayette Rotary. So I'm looking forward to this conversation tonight and all your questions, and we'll do our best to give you answers or follow up. Thank you.
I'm Chris Lee. I'm the chair of GPAC. My husband and I moved to Lafayette 25 years ago, and we live just outside downtown. We're a walking distance to BART, to the restaurants downtown. And on a good day, maybe we'll walk and do some grocery shopping. We also had our office in downtown Lafayette for 17 years. It was a great way to bring our clients into Lafayette and have them experience for a few hours at least what it's like to live here and take advantage of the downtown. My son went to Burton Valley, and while he was there, I was on the LASF board doing fundraising. As a business, we were chamber members and still are. So we really enjoy the chamber events. It's a great chance to get to know other small business people in Lafayette. I'm really excited that you're tuning in tonight. There is a lot to learn, and please don't hesitate to ask any question, big or small. We'd be more than happy to answer it, and if we don't know the answer, we'll get it for you. So without further ado, Jonathan.
All right, great. Thanks everyone for the introductions. So we'll move on to the staff presentation, which we've condensed into a short video to summarize and provide an overview to the housing element and the various state requirements within that. So I'll share my screen and audio, but feel free to adjust audio on your side. Hi, my name is Jonathan. I'm a planner with the City of Lafayette, and today's video will serve as an introduction to the housing element of the general plan. We'll cover state law requirements like the Regional Housing Needs Allocation, RHNA, the BART rezoning bill, AB 2923, local housing needs, the timeline that we're working with, and most importantly, community engagement. Feel free to click the timestamps below if you're interested in a particular topic, or you can join us for the entire video. Let's get started. This is the Lafayette Design Project. Published in 1961, it set the stage for decades of careful planning to envision how Lafayette would grow. The community's current master plan, also known as the General Plan, was adopted 41 years later in 2002. The new General Plan will be the blueprint for how Lafayette will look, feel, and grow over the next 20 years. It will determine how the city shapes decisions on everything from growth, land use, housing, circulation, open space, noise, safety, and infrastructure. While these topics are discussed in separate chapters called Elements in the General Plan, they are all interrelated, and together they will shape growth and development policies for the next 2 decades.
So think about this. 20 years ago, when we last did our general plan, there were no cell phones, there was no internet. And so we need to update this. And the things that are new to refresh is we have climate change, for example. We have new overflow traffic from Highway 24 from mobile apps. We have diversity and equity and inclusion issues that we want to include in this new general plan.
Lafayette's last comprehensive general plan update was completed in 2002 with a 20 to 25 year horizon. The City Council has initiated this current update to address the current and future needs and values of the community. The current general plan encourages the development of a variety of housing for people of all incomes, the preservation of neighborhoods, and housing opportunities for all, regardless of race, age, gender, sexual orientation, marital status, or national origin. Over the next 4 years, a volunteer-led committee of Lafayette residents called the General Plan Advisory Committee will be looking to you, residents, employees, property and business owners, and visitors to let them know what they need to consider as they update the general plan. The process includes an intensive engagement effort with many ways to get involved. The GPAC and city staff will be hosting public meetings and informational sessions, community workshops, surveys, quizzes, walking tours, and much more. The city is at the beginning stages of the general plan update process, and the first step is the housing element.
And the housing element gives us a chance to chart our course going forward in terms of how we want to have housing change and adapt in the years ahead. And in that, there's a challenge and there's also an opportunity. And the challenge is primarily the state's mandate to increase the housing supply in California. And we, like every city in this state, have a mandate to come up with more housing.
The California Department of Housing and Community Development, or HCD, sets the number of housing units a regional government needs to plan for in the next 8 years. These 8-year periods are called cycles, and we are currently in the 5th cycle, preparing for the 6th. The state issues overall numbers to each region, and each region allocates numbers to each local jurisdiction. This is called a Regional Housing Needs Allocation, or RHNA, pronounced RHNA. In Lafayette's case, HCD gives a number to the Association of Bay Area Governments, known as ABAG, who then develops a methodology by which each jurisdiction in the 9-county Bay Area will receive its allocation. The city is not required to build this number of units. The market does that. Rather, the city must ensure there's enough land zoned at appropriate densities to accommodate the RHNA. The overall number is split into 4 income categories: very low, low income, moderate income, and above moderate income. What do these terms mean, and what is affordable housing? In Contra Costa, the median income for a household of 4 was $119,200. A very low income household of 4 would make 50% or less of this amount, a lower income household at 51 to 80%, a moderate income household at 81 to 120%, and an above moderate income household over 120%. Almost all of the housing built in Lafayette are in the above moderate income category. Lafayette's RHNA allocation for the 5th cycle housing element was 400 units. Given the statewide shortage of housing, particularly affordable housing, the Bay Area's allocation has more than doubled for the 6th cycle, and Lafayette's draft allocation is expected to be 2,100 units. ABAG will issue updated allocations in the spring of 2021 once HCD signs off on the draft methodology adopted by ABAG. State law requires that the housing element contain a site-by-site inventory of land suitable for development of all housing types, including multifamily. As has been the case for the last 2 housing elements, staff has conducted a citywide review of parcels that are either vacant or underutilized to discern if these sites are appropriate for development. These sites may or may not be developed into housing, as the choice and always will be the owner's decision. Some factors considered in the development of the site inventory include but are not limited to whether a site has an underperforming use on it, whether the site's topography makes it suitable for housing development, and whether the site is of sufficient size to be developed for housing. To meet its housing goals, the city will need to increase densities in several areas of the city. This is also known as upzoning. Let's take the downtown for example, a majority of which has a density of 35 dwelling units per acre. This means on a 1 acre parcel, a developer can build a maximum of 35 dwelling units, whether apartments, townhomes, or condominiums. Upzoning involves changing the zoning designation of a parcel to allow for an increase in dwelling units per acre. How that increased density looks depends on a number of factors, including existing design standards, the size of the lot, and the size of the units. Upzoning any parcel in the city is expected to garner some level of public interest. Does the city concentrate development in downtown? Should density be evenly distributed across the city, or should we only increase density near BART? Where, how, and to what extent the city increases density to accommodate the plus 2,000 units will be a key conversation for the housing element update. AB 2923, signed into law by the governor in 2018, requires that properties owned by BART around its stations be upzoned by local jurisdictions to at least 75 dwelling units per acre and at least 5 stories in height by July 1st, 2022. The BART parking lots totaling about 11 acres on Deer Hill Road will need to be upzoned to accommodate approximately 825 units, or these units will have to be built somewhere else. Rezoning these parcels for compliance with AB 2923 will also aid in reaching our RHNA allocation. The housing element will discuss much more than just the state law requirements like AB 2923 and RHNA. It's also a great opportunity to come together, look at our existing housing stock, and assess our needs moving forward. The community will collaborate on programs to expand housing opportunities to those with lower incomes, seniors, persons with disabilities, and the homeless. It's an opportunity to brainstorm ways to incentivize developers to include more affordable housing in their projects and to help promote the construction of accessory dwelling units. The reason the housing element is being updated first is because Lafayette must submit its draft housing element to the state by the end of 2022. The housing element is the only piece of the general plan that is legally required to be certified by the state. HCD will review the proposed goals, policies, and programs to ensure Lafayette is doing its part to create safe, stable, and affordable housing opportunities for all segments of the population. 2022 may sound far away, but there's a lot to do before then, including gathering community input, drafting the document, getting feedback from the public, and conducting environmental review. If the city does not have a certified housing element, Lafayette could lose more local control over how and where housing projects get built, and could lose out on funding for infrastructure projects, receive substantial fines, and more. The general plan update is going to affect every member of the community, so we put a high priority on reaching every stakeholder possible.
So we'll know we have a good housing element when the community has really had a chance to work through the process, to learn about it, to talk about it, to work through the complexities of it with their neighbors, including those constraints of state law requirements, and then ultimately to have come together for a collaborative solution.
Opportunities to learn more about the housing element and provide input on the process are just beginning. The city has scheduled a number of info sessions based on geographic region and interest group in the city, so please pay attention to those. Feel free to visit planlafayette.org for those login details, and also visit our engagement platform, Engagement HQ, to participate in our weekly activities like polls, surveys, quizzes, and mapping activities. Thanks for joining us in the housing element video, and we will continue with the general plan.
And I think that Lafayette rises to the occasion, and I'm sure we'll come up with something that works well for our community.
All right, thanks for sticking with us and watching the video. Big shout out to Jim Cervantes for the guest feature. Let's move on to the Q&A, which is the bulk of tonight's meeting. So it is 6:16. Our event tonight will end at 7:30, so we plan on wrapping up the Q&A around 7:20, 7:25 to allow for some closing statements. Let's begin the Q&A. A couple things to remember. One is that this section of the meeting is a Q&A, so questions and answers. We definitely need and want the community's input and ideas about the housing element and how to address these topics and these important decisions that we're going to make. And we've created a space just for that on Engagement HQ, which is our digital engagement platform. We have ideas walls. So we have one specifically for tonight for the Reliez Valley area. I'll show how to navigate that towards the end. But if you have an idea or thoughts about housing, please save it for that platform. Tonight is about questions and for staff to provide answers to the best of our ability. Lastly is that we have about 40 people in attendance, many of which likely have questions. So we're not timing folks, but please keep your questions concise so that we can answer as many questions as we can and have as many people participate in our meeting as we can. But we'll move on to that. So Sarah, do we have any folks wanting to ask questions?
We do, and I'll just say if you would like to ask a question, please use the raise your hand function at the bottom of your screen, or if you're calling in, press *9, and I will promote David Clark as panelist now.
Hi, good evening. I've got a question about upzoning, and I'm curious how far up upzoning can go. So, for example, the property across from the athletic club on Mount Diablo Road, I think, is up for consideration. And the way that's zoned now, if you look at the numbers, there are roughly 60 acres there, I think. And if that were to be built out according to the current zoning, that would accommodate 6 houses. If that were upzoned to the same density as downtown at 35 units per acre, I did the math and I think you'd get 2,100 units, housing units. Is that achievable? I mean, is that something, can that property be upzoned from, I think it's LR10 to whatever the density that allows 35? Or is there a cap on it such that that's an overreach? When does that become a taking, for example? Thanks.
Well, I can answer that. Theoretically, it can be zoned pretty much anything if there's a justified reason to do it. I mean, but it would not be a taking if the value of the property was deprived for the owner. It's not a taking if you reduce the value of the property because you make it basically unusable. In this case, the opposite would be true. The value would probably go up, because of upzoning tends to make properties more valuable because you can get more development on them. But in terms of a specific number, there's no specific number that we've discussed, and there's no specific official cap as far as I'm concerned that it could be for that upzoning.
All right, thank you.
David, I'll bring in Paul Melman. Hi, Paul, you're in the meeting if you'd like to make your question.
Who are you calling on, Paul? Oh, I'm so sorry. My question is, I don't know, I'm not getting my video here, just a second. Not that it's that important. Okay. I've lived in Lafayette for extremely long time, over 45 years. I have business here, raised my children here, and I've watched, as everyone else, the city's problems. I'm extremely concerned about fire safety. I'm terribly concerned about congestion, particularly from the north end of town, past Akalani's High School, all the way to BART. Ways is an issue because there have been a lot of studies, traffic studies, that have shown professional traffic studies, not the ones hired by the city of Lafayette on recent developments, but independent studies showing that when there's trouble on 680, Waze drivers immediately move over to Pleasant Hill Road, 44,000 cars per day, 5 days a week, 225,000 cars on Highway 24. When Waze is, when the traffic studies are done, they're showing that the speed on 680 and the speed on Pleasant Hill Road are about the same, moving on to Highway 24. We've got students there, 1,500 students at Acalanes High School, 550 kids at Spring Hill School. We've got on Deer Hill Montessori School, we've got daycare centers, a gas station, and an approval by the city council for 315 apartments right on that corner. It's unconscionable to think that at the epicenter of the Diablo winds, and we saw it with the tennis club, Lafayette Tennis Club burning, that this is a seriously impacted area with the potential to burn all the neighbors down and not be able to get out of Quant, out of Spring Hill, out of Stanley Boulevard, and all of those travelers are coming from the north to the south to get to 24.
I hear your concern, but we're here to answer questions. Do you have a question? If not,
I do, and none of those, and my question is, none of those are related to what I just said. My question is, what is the city? And I heard Jonathan's, I heard the video. What is the city doing to potentially deal with 1,000 plus students in the developments with the schools? And the answer we generally get is that, oh, that's up to the school. I think it's up to this committee to make it very clear that the responsibility of the city and the developer, as they've done in Dublin, for example, where in the Sahara area, whenever they build like that, and we're building it out like they are, that the developer is responsible for, in one case, $2 million, and then the city, the school district had to put a bond issue for 20 million more, and then to build another school. We're running the same potential. What are we going to do about 1,000 kids?
Again, we appreciate your comments. The specific request or question regarding the school district, it is the city will work with the school district to explain where housing may or may not be going. But ultimately, the law is very clear that this is specifically a requirement for the location of, potential location of, and the specific like traffic and other kinds of environmental impacts of new housing, potential new housing development. It does not at all address the schools. But if you have comments about the school issue, which, obviously it's important at the end when Jonathan shares where to put those comments down, we'd appreciate it. Thank you.
So that's the answer that we've been getting for a long, long time. I'm suggesting that this committee has a responsibility to make it clear that a recommendation from the general plan, the new general plan, is that there has to be other ways to fund this infrastructure to get kids to school.
That's a great comment. And again, let's please put that on the Reliez Valley wall, because that's an important comment. We're really just trying to answer specific questions to clarify things for people.
Okay, sorry, I was so fired up.
Yeah, that's okay, Paul. Paul, I think as a general principle of California, schools are entitled to charge impact fees based on some sort of a nexus between that impact of that additional student. I don't know specifically what Lafayette schools do, but I could bet you money that they do charge an impact fee. So there's development and there's generating students, they get something for it because there's a charge. So the adequacy of that is, I think, is an effort by the school district. But I think, to Diana's point, there would be some discussion between the city and the school district on that. The school district needing to sort of figure out what the appropriate impact fee is. I think it's a really good point you bring up.
Thanks.
Thank you. Lynn McMichael will be a panelist now.
Good evening. First, I want to thank you all for the unbelievable hours. I don't know how you keep your marbles. Honestly, I'm so grateful to you for doing this and making Housing 101 available for the whole community. I've lived here in Lafayette in Happy Valley since 1969. And I am hoping that we can expand equitable housing throughout our whole community. And I'm wondering if there are redevelopment funds to help developers to build more inclusive housing? That's my question.
Unfortunately, the redevelopment agencies throughout the state of California were disbanded by the governor in 2012. So there is no more redevelopment money. There are no redevelopment areas anywhere in California. There's been some discussion at the state legislature's level to institute something called, basically, people call it redevelopment 2.0, that would allow further tax increment financing. But so far, those bills have been either shot down or tabled. So there is no more redevelopment. There are no funds available for housing at the local level. There may be here and there if there's been a donation of some kind or paying a fee for something. But generally speaking, the money that the city used to get does not exist anymore.
Right. And I could chime in. I'm on the board of a nonprofit that does low-income housing. Since we don't have redevelopment anymore, these are really complex things to put together. You need deep, deep subsidies to make it affordable for low-income people. And so it's a really complex layer cake of financing tools that get used. It's tough. So the state can say to us, you need to build X amount. Well, we don't build, the city doesn't build, but X amount of low-income housing. But that's something you need to put together complex transactions like Diana, you did, to make them work. It's not easy.
So do you folks have any suggestions of how we could help you or anybody to get this thing off the ground?
Great.
I think reaching out to local legislators and telling them how important redevelopment funds have been and that continue to be an important aspect of making affordable housing work would be really helpful. Right now, like Jim mentioned, the Belterre project, which did have, it was like the last redevelopment project in the city, I think, pretty much, which got more than $3.5 million from the city. I think there are upwards of 8 or 9 different funding sources that went into that development. That's not the same as for a market rate developer. It's usually one funding source, and for an affordable project, it can be, I worked on a project that had 12 different funding sources and with all competing in different requirements. So yeah, it's very difficult to do. And I think advocating with your as a constituent to your state senators would be great.
Yeah, I think that's really the best thing you could do as Senator Glazer, an assembly member of Archon, to let them know that this is important, because honestly, that's probably the only way it's going to happen.
Wow. Thank you very much.
No.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Lynn. I'll let in Jean Fulmer.
Oh, am I unmuted?
You are in the meeting. We can hear you.
Oh, hey, thank you so much for letting me in. I'm Jean Fulmer. I live at 1477 Reliez Valley Road. I also happen to be on the Lafayette School Board. So when I heard developer fees, I just want to weigh in and encourage you to reach out to Richard Whitmore and John Nickerson. Actually, we do not set our own fees. That is done by Ed Code section 17620. And the Lafayette School District gets $2.86 per square foot of residential. So adequacy is definitely a concern, and I would certainly ask you to really loop in the superintendents on anything related to development that would impact the schools. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jean.
Paulina.
Sorry, I was on mute. Thank you, everybody, for letting me ask my question here. I'm a new resident of Lafayette and happen to live off of Reliez Valley, but in the unincorporated area of the city. And so pardon me if my question is not truly maybe applicable to this format, but since the question about school districts came up, what is, and is there a plan within this framework or outside of it, at some point, the unincorporated area of Lafayette to be included into the proper Lafayette. Honestly, I'm not speaking the right jargon here, but I think if someone can clarify my question for the committee, that would be great. But basically, we're in the city of Lafayette, outside of the school boundaries. And what does it take for, since there's obviously a challenge about housing and funding for the schools, et cetera. We also moved from Dublin, so we've experienced that hyper growth, and we truly value and love Lafayette. For years we've come here. We have family and friends, and our businesses here as well. Thank you.
I'm going to defer to one of the staff because I don't really know enough about, outside, inside, what's actually in there.
Okay, I'll do my best. So as I understand it, incorporation of areas outside the city limits is actually within the jurisdiction of the local area formation commission, LAFCO as it's known. So essentially there would need to be a petition for it to happen. The city council would need to think it's a good idea, and then also this more regional body would need to think it's a good idea as well.
Okay, because obviously, as residents of Lafayette, and we're, taxpayers, and like I said, business owners, both my husband and I, both of our businesses were moved to Lafayette. We would love to participate in, contributions to the school district, and et cetera. So, and all the changes that are happening. Okay, I will follow up with one of you at another time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm not seeing any other hands raised at this time. Oh, there we go. Cheryl.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I was appreciating what Jim was saying. Someone was telling me about a nonprofit project that took place outside of Walnut Creek BART station up towards the hills. And so for a project like that to get done by a nonprofit such as Habitat for Humanity, that's where you need all those funding sources. Is that correct?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. I was just encouraged by that process because the development fees would probably, or the building labor would be free. And so I was just wondering how that worked. Thank you. And then for Diane, I had another question about ADUs. Sorry, I'm harping on ADUs, but so I understand that affordable housing with ADUs has to be deeded in. But what about the moderate level? When you talked about the ADUs that one time at GPAC, was the ADUs don't have to be deeded if it's just?
No. Let's look at this sort of historically. Probably about more than 5 years ago, the only way we could count ADUs was if they were deed restricted. The state, because the rules about ADUs are much easier for a homeowner to actually develop an ADU, the state has relaxed some of its rules on affordability. Although it's still hard to classify certain ADUs as like very low income or low income. We definitely are getting close to having an agreement with the state, we being a lot of the professionals who are working on this particular issue, to get at least some buy-in from the state for us to count them as moderate income units, which is below market, slightly below market rate, maybe not very affordable. But they're definitely, the state is definitely interested in, and we'll put out some guidance to explain that we can count some units as this income category and that income category. As an aside, I've been, for the last 2 years, I've been collecting data every month from like Craigslist about ADUs that are for rent in a variety of jurisdictions, including La Miranda, to figure out exactly, so we can also pitch the idea that some percentage of units we can count further in the lower income category.
Okay.
So that's good news, I think.
That's awesome news.
Yeah.
So we can offset some of the housing needs in the future if the moderate is approved by the state.
Correct.
Yeah.
That is really good news. Okay. And then the only other thing I wanted to say was, can you, it doesn't come up very much. I meant to reply after the last meeting and in the email that I got, but the buffer numbers, So if we have the buffer numbers, we don't have to build the buffer numbers. The buffer numbers are just for if we need to swap land or something.
Well, first, let's go back. What I said at one of the last meetings is the city doesn't build any housing. All the city has to do is plan for it in case it gets built. The idea of a buffer, let's say the allocation is we have to plan for 2,100 units like Jonathan's presentation showed. We want some flexibility above that number. So far, we've been targeting about 50% because if now the rules have changed such that if in a planning period we say this site can be affordable, let's say to low income housing, but it's actually developed with market rate housing, we have to make sure that those units that we ascribed to that site can be accommodated somewhere else in the inventory. The purpose of the buffer is so if something happens with one site that goes differently than what we thought, that there's enough to accommodate those units in somewhere else in the inventory. This is made more difficult because now the state law says you have to accommodate or have in your inventory enough sites by income level, which it used to be just the total number. Like make sure that if you had 2,000 units, you always had 2,000 in units if one site turned commercial or something like that. Because the city doesn't have any, direct control over what an individual owner would want to do, right? So now, but it's by income category, which makes it even more difficult. So that's why last time around, the last housing element, we had a buffer of almost 100%. But the allocation was very low. Right, it was only 400 units. And so the buffer was like 395 units. So it was almost 800 units total. Now we've got so many more times that it's really, I think, unreasonable to think that we need that big of a buffer, but we still need one. So that's the purpose of the buffer, is to make sure that if something either becomes not affordable when we thought it would be affordable, or something becomes commercial when we thought it would be housing, that we have enough left over in the inventory to make sure that there's the possibility for that to be developed. Does that explain it well enough?
Yeah, you did much. Sometimes it's like that it's the third time.
I'm like that too. Trust me.
Yeah, this is complicated stuff. So thank you for doing it. I know I asked ADUs last time and now I'm back again. And then just one more thing for the staff is to make sure we talk about April 12th with the Cam Burks and what he wanted to do and those two things so the people who are listening can get it. But thank you for answering so much questions, Diana. I appreciate it.
Cheryl, before you go, on the ADUs, something we talked about in an earlier GPAC meeting.
Yes.
Will likely be an element in trying to how we figure out to meet these RENA numbers. But, and Diana knows this way better than I do, but there's a kind of a look back to see what has been done historically over the last, 3 to 5 years. Right. The back of the envelope on that is that maybe, I think 10% of our RENA number, maybe we can target to ADUs.
Right.
So it's helpful, but it doesn't solve the issue.
Oh, granted, it doesn't. No, I appreciate that. I'm not expecting some miracle that's going to happen with ADUs.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Jim. I appreciate that comment. I'm just learning as much as I can, but thank you for that.
Good question.
And thank you, Diana. And thank you for all your work you're putting into this.
Thanks, Cheryl. Janet, thank you, Cheryl. Hi, Janet, you're in the meeting if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask your question. Janet, we can't hear you if you're trying to speak. Bottom left side, there's a microphone. You want to click on that for mute or unmute. Oh, there we go. Connecting.
I think we spent the last year on Zoom trying to connect. This is like what the world has been like.
I can let the next person in if we want to wait for the audio to connect. I know Janet has it in her to get there. Okay, I'll let Chad in the meantime. Hi, Chad. Oh, there's Janet. Although it's still connecting.
No.
Okay, Chad, you go first. Oh, Chad, we can't hear you. I don't see a mute button on yours, but I can't hear you. Oh, are you on the phone also? Okay, well, Janet, you're in and you probably can talk now.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes, we can.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. Hi, I'm Janet Thomas. I've lived in Lafayette almost 40 years, spent most of my career teaching at Camp Lindo and then Akalani's, raised 3 kids here. 2 of them live in Lafayette now. One of them in the front house, we just moved in last week to an ADU in the back of the house. So actually the last speaker spoke to one of my questions, which was how to get ADUs to count in terms of the RENA numbers. And if in fact they did count, if you could increase to 2 ADUs, for instance, as part of an ordinance in Lafayette. There certainly are properties where more than 1 ADU might be appropriate. Especially for situations like mine. Our son could never have afforded to move to Lafayette. So this has made it workable for him. But my main reason for just joining is just to express my view that I also would love to see more affordable and inclusive housing in Lafayette, however that could happen. And I'm so sorry that the redevelopment funds went. I thought Belterre, I went to the ribbon cutting of Belterre. I was so proud of Lafayette for putting that in. And I appreciate your advice to contact Senator Glazer and Assemblymember Bauer-Kahn. I will do that tomorrow. I personally would like to see more housing close to BART, and I'm very, very conscious of the fire concerns. So understand it's a very complex situation. And I'd also like to see housing considered across from Oakwood, in that part of town. I'd love to see possibly a better transportation system where people could get easily to BART, access BART easily. And then my final question is to ask what the status is of the terraces of Lafayette. Because I know that would solve, that's a huge project. And I personally, I live probably about 200 meters from the terraces property. And I actually support the terraces. Unlike, many people in the city, I think that with the mitigations, it's certainly workable. But I would love to know if the city staff could tell us what the status of that is now.
I will defer to Sarah on that one.
So it's been approved. Is your question more along the lines of how will it relate to our RENA allocations?
Yes.
Okay. Then
that I can answer.
Okay.
We will include it in the inventory until such time as we're told we can include it. So it's both a beauty and a curse that this process is necessarily long, especially now with the fact that, we've got the BART upzoning issue. What are we going to do with that? What are we going to do with other things that, Deer Hill, et cetera, all these decisions that have to be made. But for the time being, we will count them in our inventory towards our RENA allocation until something happens with, I believe there's a court case, am I correct? There's a lawsuit, so one way or the other with a lawsuit, it's for right now, we can continue to count it because it's not been adjudicated. We can continue to count it because the city has approved it. And so it just means like waiting until such time as we can't count it anymore. Yet another reason why we need a nice healthy buffer in case those units don't pan out.
Okay, okay. And finally, I just want to thank you all. I've been on a number of these calls and you all are terrific. So thank you.
Thanks, Janet.
Thank you,
Chad,
Jen.
Chad, do we have your audio up? Are you, I can't hear you, but are you calling on the phone? Is the last 4 digits 7942? Yes, okay, great. Allowed to talk. How about now? Oh,
can you hear me?
yes, we can.
Bravo.
Technology.
Right. Sorry, yeah, thanks. My audio wouldn't connect, so this always works better. So hopefully you guys can hear me.
Yep.
Comment, then a question. Comment is I live near the terraces as well and am against it for whatever that's worth. I think, you know, I'm for all for high density housing. It makes a ton of sense. I personally think it needs to be closer to Barton. I don't think it's workable at that site. So, but I've made those feelings known in a variety of forums. The question I have is, as I believe Jim pointed out, there's, you know, every city in the Bay Area is going through some version of what we are now, right? And I think our allocation was going from like 400 to 2,000 or something along those lines. So, you know, big jump. Everybody was probably getting something like that, right? And they're just, you know, having a hard time swallowing the big gap in how much more housing we're supposed to be building. The last time I checked, we were closer to complying with our housing element than other cities around us. Is that still the case is my first question. And my second question is, if basically nobody is in compliance with their housing element, like, and we're closer than most, from my perspective, how urgent is the need to get to that compliance number, much less a buffer on top of that?
Good questions. I'll take the second question, and the first question I will probably defer to the city. The second question is, the problem is that then the city really could lose a lot of control over what happens with housing if it does not have a compliant housing element. And by fines could be $10,000 to $100,000 per month for not complying. As you can see with some of our Southern California friends, they've come up against this, the hammer of the Attorney General. What's more, I think, important to understand is that if the city does not have a complying housing element, and a developer can go to a judge and say, they don't have a complying housing element and I want to build a 30-story skyscraper here. And the judge could say, sure. And the city would have absolutely nothing to prevent it from happening. I think that the loss of local control, I mean, granted, the state has slowly but surely eroded a lot of local control in many ways, but this level of the loss of local control would be really stunning and really difficult. I also think that I know that the city would lose out on a lot of funding opportunities, and there are certain transportation funds that the city would lose for upkeep of streets. Developers who are trying to apply for affordable housing funds to create affordable housing in Lafayette would not be allowed because we don't have a certified housing element. I think that, you know, to the extent that we do our very best to comply and pitch our case to the state for why we think we can comply, I think that's really the best route. It's always been the case that local jurisdictions have had to take on more units than they thought they would have to have. This time around, considering that the allocation to the to the ABAG area, the 9 Bay Area counties, it was 441,000 units. And the last element was 189,000 units. Everybody is going up, and some by dramatic amounts. Obviously, percentage-wise, Lafayette has gone up a huge amount, but in sheer numbers, there are some jurisdictions that have gone from like 3,000 units to 27,000 units. So we're all in the same boat, and we're all kind of working together to try to figure out how to do this. I think that the advantages of complying far outweigh the, the disadvantages. I think the disadvantages are really problematic for the jurisdiction. I think that what we do is we really try to give it our best shot, make the case for what we need to do, and then see how it shakes out with the state.
Diana?
Yeah.
Maybe clarifying one thing. What you're talking about is setting up the zoning or entitlements or whatever their term is to allow for the RENA number plus a buffer.
Yeah.
Whether those get built or not is not up to the city. It's
not up to the city. Right.
So what the city can do to satisfy the state really is to lay the template out where theoretically stuff could get built. If it doesn't happen, that's the market. And I think that's what you're getting at here. The negative consequences are if we just say, goodbye to you, we're not going to do anything. There's a risk there. If we do lay out the template for the RENA plus the buffer, and then the market doesn't respond at all for whatever reason, we tried our best. Diana, I want to make sure I'm clear on that.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's really it. I mean, there's some flexibility in terms of how big of a buffer we need. The state has never said what that buffer should be. They have come out with guidance saying at least 15 to 30%. We're actually right now shooting for 50 just because A, we want to cover ourselves in case things turn south. Secondly, we can count them towards the next housing element if they don't get built. So there are some benefits of planning for this, even though even though it's a tough decision making process.
Right. Chad, did that help with that second part of the question you had?
Yeah, it helps. I get it that, we just need to have the plan. It doesn't mean that they're going to get built. But in that case, I would just ask that you guys are a little more careful, because, I look at that 300 units at the terraces, for that to be something that's allowable when it's a fire hazard, it's directly across the street from a major high school. It's on the same side of the street as an elementary school, and it's in arguably the worst intersection already in the whole city is nuts. If we can allow for 300 there, then I'm just concerned where we're going to start sticking zoning to allow for other similar disasters.
Yeah, the situation we're in, we had 400 units allocated to us in the last cycle. Now it's 2,100 plus a buffer. So it's a bit of shock and awe here in terms of what the state is doing to us. So we just need to, does a council may decide to fight this? That decision's above our pay grade at GPAC. So we're just trying to figure out what the right way to respond is and let the powers that be figure it out. And there's a first part to your question. I want to make sure we got to that.
I'll take a stab at that first part. So the fifth cycle, the previous cycle, was an allocation from ABAG between the years of 2015 and 2022, I believe, or 2023. And that allocation was 400 units. The annual progress report that the city council saw last year shows that between 2015 and 2019, around 250 units were constructed. So that didn't include 2020, but likely that number got us even closer to 400.
However, just as a note, it's mostly above moderate income. It doesn't really include much in the way of very low or mod, right? Maybe one or a few units here or there because of inclusionary.
That's right.
But we are closer than the surrounding areas to meeting our allocation, where we tend to be good corporate citizens with that stuff. relative to our peers, and everybody's goals are what I would call aspirational at this point. I mean, there's no need to build 440,000 units or something like that in the Bay Area and dump this much out into the suburbs. It makes absolutely no sense. And frankly, I mean, populations post-COVID is in a pretty different spot.
Excellent. Thank you, Chad. I will let Danielle in.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. I keep noticing that my daughter has changed my screen to the giraffe and I always forget. But hi, everyone. I'm Danielle Gallagher. I'm actually a third generation Lafayette resident with young children in our schools that are fourth generation. So born and raised here, love the community, trying to understand this process. I have listened to a few meetings and I understand the first part is the housing element, but which is a key part. But what my concern is, whether it's downtown parks, open space, making sure our community stays walkable with all of these new housing elements that are downtown. So can someone kind of walk me through that process of when that comes in?
Sure. So we are doing the housing element first because we have the timelines associated with it. The state is requires it to be certified by a certain time frame, and so that's sort of why it's coming first. But all of those things are certainly interconnected, and there are other elements or chapters in the general plan which speak to things like open space, public safety, different things. So even though it's sort of a independent chapters, they're all sort of interconnected, and so it's as we kind of understand the community values around those things, we can incorporate them into those sections of the plan. And ultimately, the plan is sort of an outline of sort of our big picture goals, our policies, and then implementation strategies to actually achieve those goals.
So is it fair to say that in the next year, similar meetings like this with those elements would come up? Okay, and be available? Okay. All right. Thank you for your service to the community. We very much appreciate it.
And Danielle, to your point, you could say, how can you talk about housing without talking about transportation? I mean, that's been the gist of a bunch of questions that have come up. And that's a fair point. The thing is, we've got a deadline on housing. It's got to happen first. And that was in some of our earlier sessions, we talked about that. I don't know when transportation will come up, but we've got to deal with all these different things sequentially here. But
part of the transportation will definitely come up as part of the environmental review, because we will see the impacts of the location of potential location of housing and what that does to circulation. So that aspect, I think, of the general plan will probably come before even some of the others, because it'll be tied in with housing element. That one is definitely tied in with housing element in a kind of fundamental way.
So the good news is we'll get to do this all over again on transportation in 9 months or a year or whatever.
Yeah. Well, my main concern is really focused on parks, making the downtown inviting for both businesses, pedestrians. That is what our vibrant downtown deserves and has been. So I want to make sure that we continue to look at that. So thank you.
Thank you.
Lynn, let's see. Lynn McMichael, it sounds familiar.
Yeah, I think she spoke previously.
Okay, so Lynn, I see your hand up. I'm going to let the other folks who haven't had a chance to speak yet first, and then we'll let you in. Bill and Nancy Kleiser.
Am I unmuted now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I'm not going to, okay. Yeah, the question I had to do with the low income aspect and how that is maintained, because it strikes me that these are ultimately private developments, and the market, then if history is any indicator for this area, the market would tend to drive those rents out of the low income classification pretty quickly. So do you end up in a vicious cycle where you're always building new units, because as soon as they get built, they escalate in rent because the market drives them up more than in other areas?
It's a great question. So each of the affordable units are actually deed restricted. And I believe it's 55 years or 65 years, depending on if it's for sale or for rent.
Mm-hmm.
And so therefore it would be
55 and 45.
Oh, thank you, Diana. So there is a constraint of a deed restriction that does not allow the rent increase.
Okay, does that deed restriction carry over if the property is sold?
Yes, it does.
Yes.
So
it runs with the property.
Okay, thank you.
Very welcome. Janine Crow.
Unmute.
We can hear you.
Let's see. Oh, okay. Hello. Good
Hello.
evening. I don't know if this question has been asked before. I arrived late to the meeting. Is there any consideration of the fire department? Should we, a need maybe for a third firehouse? We used to have 3 firehouses. Now we only have 2. And with the great 20% increase in the residences in Lafayette, it might behoove us to have that third firehouse on Las Arabas opened up again.
So that's a great point. So again, this process is about planning for housing, not necessarily building for housing. And there's 2 levels of review that will be established associated with that. One is the CEQA analysis for the overall plan. So that will be incorporated in the discussions and analysis. And then very project specific review of each of the environmental impacts of each specific project. So it's sort of the general impacts and then the specific impacts of a project if it's built.
Right.
So those definitely are considerations as part of new development.
Okay, so it really wouldn't come into play until the buildings actually get built and people actually move in.
Well, I would think go ahead, sorry.
So that once there's let's say that there's, I don't know what percentage increase, let's say there's a 10% increase in population. We're not sort of in the middle. We're in the middle of getting to 20%. Then maybe an evaluation, do we have enough people to be concerned now that we need more coverage? Especially, well, downtown, my understanding, well, I don't know, it might be spread all over the place, but if you're going to really build up downtown, then that firehouse on Mont Diablo Boulevard, and then they're covering downtown and probably Reliez Valley. And then Burton Valley has St. Mary's Road firehouse, but the west end of town doesn't have anything right now, specifically for them. So anyway, I'm the daughter of a firefighter, Captain Robert Crow. He's passed away, but I still think about him and what he would say. If he were alive, he would say, open up that firehouse on Las Arabas again. He used to work there many years ago when there were a lot less people in this town than there are now. So anyway, I don't know if that's my comment, and it sounds like maybe that will be considered sometime in the future.
Thank you, Janine.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, Mayor Kendall, and then Lynn will.
Hi, Janine. I just wanted to say we did open a firehouse. We opened it last year.
Did you?
Yes, we did.
Oh,
It was
cool.
a big effort. I was there at the reopening. It was fantastic. So the one at Happy
you
Valley.
reopened it?
Yes. I just wanted to let you know.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I didn't know that because the last I heard it had been closed.
Right. It was a big push, and there was a lot of great people in Lafayette and the fire district that got that push going and got it reopened.
So reopened in 2020?
Yeah, 2019.
2019. Wow. Well, that's wonderful. My father was proud.
Good. Just wanted to let you know.
You're
We've got a
welcome.
ringer on
Thank
the
you.
call.
Okay.
Fine. Okay, and then Lynn McMichael is coming in.
I don't want to be in the way of anybody else who didn't get to ask.
I don't see any other hands raised at this time, so
Okay, so
it's your turn.
naivety of my questions, but is there a possibility that instead of just concentrating on downtown and these buildings, that we could, honest to God, integrate the city by rezoning somehow so that people who live on my block and my neighborhood would have the opportunity of having some multi-housing units next door to me and elsewhere. And then we could come in and figure out the transportation issue, because I think it would be fair to want to get those folks into the city easily and back. Is that even a possibility? Because that's my sort of dream about maybe loosening up the problems you've got in downtown.
We're going to be looking at, and the environmental consultant will be looking at a variety of possibilities about allowing certain kinds of housing in areas that maybe don't have that kind of housing. We have to balance sort of the needs, especially for affordable housing, with wanting to move affordable housing into areas that have high resources. And we need to know that, what we're doing is not exacerbating a problem with, for example, people not having access to transit, people not having access to, quality grocery stores and other amenities like the library, et cetera. So a lot of what we have to do ultimately is kind of balance the desire to distribute housing throughout the community with the concern about making sure that the people who least likely would have maybe a car, would have access to good transit, would have access to a really good grocery store. I'm reminded of, sort of a little, something that I'm working on with another city is that they've got a bunch of really wonderful housing up in the hills, et cetera. This is in action on the peninsula, not the East Bay. And they're thinking about putting affordable housing in some locations that are just gorgeous, but there's no transit there. There are no grocery stores right there. And so we have to kind of really balance all these different requirements to really make sure that what we're doing makes sense to the people who ultimately will live there. And at the same time, protect certain areas like hillsides and so forth from too much development. So all these kinds of questions that we're talking about, or we'll be discussing more in detail as time goes on. But that's a great question. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lynn. David Clark has another question.
Thanks, Sarah. I heard you say there was no one else, so I thought I'd jump back in. But Diana, you made a comment which kind of piqued my interest about one of the reasons to go through the exercise is that we'll get a credit in the next cycle. And I wondered about that for quite a while. So my question, I guess, is, do we get some kind of credit, or is there a carryover of, I realize the numbers are small, but from the prior cycle for the, is it tracked to that fine, is it fine tuned to that extent?
Yes. For example, we had a discussion today, staff and I had a discussion today about a couple of developments that are entitled, they have permits, they've either just started construction or will start construction. And the basic idea is if a site that's being developed for housing that was maybe counted in the inventory for the last time around, but won't be actually built until, let's say, the magic date is June 30th, 2022. If it doesn't receive its certificate of occupancy until after that date, we can count it towards the 6th cycle. So as we're going through thinking about opportunity sites and so forth, we're going to add those projects. For example, one of those would be the terraces. We can count it towards, if it doesn't actually get built until after 2022, if it does get built, we can count it. Same with part of Woodbury Highlands, not the whole thing, but part of it because it's a phased development. So we have to make some judgments about and add them to our list to see, okay, is this going to go tip over to July 1st, 2022, in which case we can count it against our RENA allocation going forward.
No.
The magic date has to do with some weird stuff in state law about what's the planning period versus what's the housing element period. Don't ask me because I don't understand it. I've been doing this for 20 plus years. I still don't get it.
Well, okay, and I appreciate that. It wasn't, that wasn't quite what I had in mind.
Okay, then ask again.
Yeah, I think I phrased my question incorrectly, but I appreciate your answer. But if, for example, the RENA allocation in the prior cycle for us was round numbers 400 units.
Yeah.
And we bumped it up round numbers another 400 units. So we got roughly a total of 800. And I think Jonathan said, I don't know, 250 of those units were built.
Mm-hmm.
Granted, most of those were probably above, as you said, above moderate. So, assuming
that leftover, are you asking if that leftover can be used in the next allocation?
Yes. Is it used somehow? Does it count against us or does it count for us?
Counts for us.
Okay.
So there are sites on our inventory from last time around that were not developed. We can include them again.
I see. Okay, that makes sense.
We have to go through, but to me, it's minor compared to we can definitely reuse those sites.
Yeah, I get that they're not big numbers. Okay, thank you.
But David, so you're asking, so let's say we got to 500 in this current cycle where our bogey was 400. Are you asking if you could count that extra 100 against this next cycle? Is that the question, or?
The question was more like if we had 400, we had 800, let's say we had 800 units total, the allocation plus the buffer, and we built 250. That leaves, my math is not good, 550 units left. We can count those in the new allocation against the new allocation as sites.
Yeah, as identified sites.
Yes.
Yeah, and Jim, yeah, that is kind of what I was, maybe a better hypothetical is, if we built last year, if our 400 plus 400 was 800 and developers just loved us, so they wound up building 1,200 units. We had to go out, well, they built all 800. So our RENA allocation was 4. We provided a buffer of another 4. So we had 800 available. So we built all 800. Would that second 400 above the RENA allocation, would that reduce this cycle's? I know that didn't happen, but
no.
Would that reduce this cycle's requirement?
It'd be nice, but no, that is one of the problems with the buffer.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think we get a pat on the back from Housing and Community Development. And that's about it.
That is it.
Okay. Ready. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Warren Siegel will be promoted now.
Hello.
Hi, Warren. We can hear you. What's your question?
My concern is with the housing that may be built close to the BART station and how that affects the current number of parking spaces that BART station has. if we recall the pre-pandemic days, those slots filled very quickly. It also appears to my memory that just in the last 2 years, they did major regrading, drainage, paving, putting in solar units to make that parking lot better. If any housing is built that takes away one of those parking lots, does that mean that a structure will be built to replace those spots? Because I think BART really needs at least this number of parking spots we have now if they are to go back to the prior patronage. And especially if our population increases and we want people to use transit. My other thought is if we're going to build more housing either near BART or this terraces project, I hope we're going to widen that Deer Hill Road so that it's more than just one lane going up and down. That would alleviate some of that congestion. And as long as there's going to be a lot of trucks for construction, that would be the time to do it. Thank you.
Thanks for your question. Specifically, the BART bill does not require, and the TOD plans do not require BART to replace parking that exists. And the city obviously has a great interest in making sure that there is replacement parking for those that would be lost. Nothing would prevent us from working with a developer on those sites to make sure that at least some of those parking spaces are replaced. But ultimately, the decision is not the city's to make; it's BART's to make. Obviously, we would do our best to negotiate with BART, but again, there's nothing in here. If we were to upzone the site according to the BART requirements, there's nothing to say that there will be a specific developer or development happening anytime soon. I mean, if we decide, meaning the city decides that it's to be upzoned, there are a lot of things that have to happen, and one of those would be to work with BART about what the city sees as important issues pertaining to development. The city wouldn't be the one really probably to pick the developer. It would be BART because BART owns the site. And that's actually true on any development. The city is not a party to a decision unless it's a city-owned site. The city is not party to a decision about who the developer might potentially be. But thank you for your comments. Appreciate it. And I just wanted to say also that with respect to Deer Hill and other streets surrounding the BART site, one of the things that the EIR consultant would do would be looking at the impacts on traffic and circulation around that area as part of its environmental impact report. So thanks.
And if I could chime in, actually today's Rotary, it's a plug for Rotary here. BART Director Alan talked, and one of the questions was sort of in this vein. And if you look at Walnut Creek, there's a big development going on there. There's a big parking structure there, which is new. That was a condition of the city of Walnut Creek to build that. The developer built it, basically owns it, runs it, or has a long-term lease and runs it with a parking at $15 to $18 a space. And that was a condition for the development of the housing. All that preceded that BART bill that was talked about earlier, AB 2923. So my sense was that BART doesn't have a real interest in building a parking structure. They're very expensive and kind of a lost leader. So all this has to get figured out, down the line. And it's kind of complicated. But as a longtime BART commuter, I remember those days when if you got to the lot after 7:30, you were done. And that's something that we'll have to grapple with.
Thanks, Warren. I'm not seeing any other hands raised. If there are any last questions.
I just wanted to, time-wise, it's 7:21.
Oh.
I see one more.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, just a quick question. We're talking about this in the context of a city, but earlier there was a question regarding the unincorporated area of basically the county. Are these same requirements being imposed on unincorporated areas as well? Or are the cities being asked to carry the burden solely?
No, unincorporated counties throughout the Bay Area are being required to carry more than also big numbers. I know for Solano County, because I was involved with some discussions with them, they had a huge lift and they don't have infrastructure to meet the needs. So they've got a bigger problem than, for example, a lot of cities do because the cities generally have the infrastructure. So no, it was not disproportionately placed on cities. It's really been pretty thoughtfully distributed throughout the Bay Area. Sort of certain unincorporated areas, for example, like San Mateo County near Pescadero and stuff, which is all agriculture. Those areas may not have had the same level of burden because of a variety of factors. But generally speaking, the cities were not disproportionately, I don't think, disproportionately impacted.
And then a quick follow-up. I mean, where a city like Lafayette abuts a county area. I mean, earlier we had a question from somebody at the further end of Reliez Valley. So you go from city jurisdiction to county jurisdiction. Is there a mechanism for, I guess, integrating the plans between the county areas and the city areas?
Yes, and that would have been what ABAG calls a subregion, and that would have required it's past time now for this one, but a group of jurisdictions that abut one another can work together to decide that they want to redistribute units. I can't remember what is the major one in the Bay Area. I think that it was probably on San Mateo County, but I'm not sure. But yeah, they can do that. But in this case, I don't believe there was anything in Contra Costa County that was a subregion where jurisdictions joined together to redistribute according to what they wanted to do.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
That's actually a really interesting question. We haven't talked about that at GPAC, and I guess Diana, kind of the window may be passed, but it's a good question.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thank you, Bill. So I think we'll go ahead and wrap up, make our closing comments. Jonathan, if you want to take over.
Yes. All right. So wanted to highlight a few resources to stay involved. The housing element in the general plan at large. One is to sign up for e-notifications. So Chris Lee and Jim Cervantes, our wonderful chair and vice chair, represent our general plan advisory committee, which will be leading the charge throughout the general plan. And we have those meetings twice a month. So it's important that folks that are interested stop by and participate in those meetings. So you can sign up for e-notifications and get notified before those meetings happen by going to the city's website, which is lovelafayette.org. Hover over the City Hall tab, click on e-notification, and then you'll be brought to this page, a few lines to fill out, and then click on General Plan Update. That will get you notified for everything related to the general plan, and then submit. So next is planlafayette.org, and this is the website that's dedicated to the general plan, and that includes the housing element. One thing I wanted to show is Engagement HQ, which is where we are hosting all of our engagement activities. So surveys, ideas walls, mapping activities, that is all here. And if you had a comment or an idea about housing, about where housing should be located, how it should look, where it should go, feel free to drop that into the Reliez Valley ideas wall. And you can join the other folks that have already left some ideas. So perfect place for that. We'll throw it over to Chair Lee and Jim Cervantes.
Great. Well, I want to thank everyone who attended the meeting via Zoom, and thank everyone who asked questions. I just made a short list of some of the questions, and I'm always amazed at the thoughtfulness and knowledge base that Lafayette residents have. I mean, we talked about everything from incorporated and unincorporated areas to fire dangers to redevelopment funding, ADUs, what happens if the city doesn't comply. I mean, these are all great questions. And for anybody out there who's listening, I hope that it was a good opportunity to learn more tonight. This wraps up our series of neighborhood Zoom meetings and organization Zoom meetings. We're getting ready for our next chapter in education, and you'll be hearing from us soon about that. So thank you very much. Also want to mention that once this meeting is over, you'll be getting a survey that will pop up on your browser about tonight's meeting. Please take some time and complete it. And then tomorrow you'll be getting an email also with a survey. If you would please complete that. Let us know how we did, what we can do differently, what we can do better, and how we can serve you. So, thank you.
And I would like to thank all of you for participating. Great questions. It really helps us and the GPAC to sort of try to be more responsive, because this process really only works to the extent that the citizens are involved. And I think that's been the dynamic I've seen so far. The GPAC's been a good committee. We've got Councilmember Gallagher and the mayor involved. And we're trying to come up with something that is responsive and thoughtful and hopefully tries to address an important issue in a way that works for this community. So it really only works if you're involved. There's some, Jonathan talked about some online connectivity here. This is the reality now in the Zoom world we're in. Please take advantage of that, the great tools that staff has built. So really encourage you all to sort of be active in this and look forward to your involvement. Thank you. Guess we're done.